She thought she was humiliating a cleaner, sneering as I knelt to mop her spilled coffee. She had no idea I was the man who just bought her company, and I was about to clean far more than just the floor. The sound cut through the morning buzz of the office like a shard of glass. It wasn't the clatter of the ceramic mug hitting the pristine white tile, nor the splash of scalding hot coffee painting a Rorschach blot on the floor. It was her voice, a voice I had come to know well over the past 3 months. A voice that could curdle milk from 50 paces. "Look what you've done, you idiot," she sneered. The she was Veronica Vance, head of marketing and the self-appointed queen of this sterile, glass-walled hive. Her eyes, the color of cold steel, were locked on me. Not on the mess, but on me. As if I, personally, had offended her existence. I stayed on my haunches, a roll of paper towels in one hand, carefully blotting the spreading brown puddle. My uniform, a plain gray jumpsuit with building services stitched over the pocket, was already a bit worn. It was part of the camouflage. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the floor. Rule number 1 of my little undercover operation: never make eye contact with the predators. It invites a challenge. "Are you deaf? I'm talking to you," she snapped. The office had gone quiet. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on the back of my neck. Keyboards had stopped clacking. The low hum of the servers seemed to hold its breath. This was the morning entertainment. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance," I said, my voice deliberately soft and monotone. "It was an accident. I'll have it cleaned up immediately." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "An accident? You were clumsy. You weren't watching where you were going. These are $1,000 shoes. Do you have any idea? If even a drop got on them..." She trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. I risked a glance up. She was standing there, one hand on her hip, the other holding her phone like a scepter. Her perfectly tailored crimson dress screamed money and power, a stark contrast to my drab gray. She was the picture of corporate success, and she was utterly, irredeemably rotten to the core. That's why I was here. For 3 months, I had pushed a cart through these halls every morning from 5 to 9. I had emptied bins filled with shredded reports and half-eaten pastries. I had cleaned smudges off glass walls and scrubbed toilets. I had listened. Oh, how I had listened. I learned more about Innovatech solutions from the whispers in the break room and the discarded notes in the trash than any due diligence report could ever tell me. I learned about the fear, the burnout, the toxic culture of blame that trickled down from the top. And Veronica, she wasn't the source, but she was its most enthusiastic disciple. "You're just a cleaner," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, venomous hiss, just for me to hear. "You should be grateful you even have a job. Now clean it. On your hands and knees. I want this floor so clean I can see my own perfect reflection in it." A few of the junior marketing associates nearby tittered nervously. No one dared to defend me. They were all too scared of being Veronica's next target. I understood. I wasn't angry at them. All my focus, all my cold, patient fury was aimed at the woman in the red dress. I simply nodded, pulling a fresh sheet from the paper towel roll. "Of course, Miss Vance." She smiled, a tight, cruel little twist of her lips. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd put the little man back in his place. She had absolutely no idea that the little man on his knees in front of her had, just yesterday afternoon, signed the final papers in a deal worth $94 million. She had no idea she was sneering at the man who now owned her $1,000 shoes, her tailored dress, her corner office, and her entire career. I finished cleaning the spill, the silence in the office slowly giving way to the hesitant return of keyboard clicks. Veronica stood over me the entire time, tapping her foot impatiently. When I was done, I stood up, my knees creaking slightly for effect. "Is there anything else, ma'am?" I asked, my face a perfect mask of humble servitude. "Just get out of my sight," she spat, turning on her heel and stalking towards the large conference room where the emergency all-hands meeting was scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. The meeting I had called for. I calmly packed my cleaning supplies back onto my cart. I watched as the entire office filed into that glass-walled room. I saw the current CEO, a nervous-looking man named Mr. Sterling, already standing at the head of the table, shuffling his notes. Veronica took a prime seat right next to him, positioning herself to be seen, to be noticed by whoever was important. She probably thought the meeting was about a new client, a new success she could claim credit for. I pushed my cart to the side of the hallway, right next to the conference room doors, and began polishing a nearby window, my reflection giving me a perfect view of the proceedings inside. My heart wasn't pounding. It was calm, steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about surgery. And Veronica was the tumor I had to cut out first. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, the microphone screeching for a second. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. As you know, the market has been volatile, and the board and I have been exploring options to secure the future of Innovatech Solutions." He paused, looking around the room. I could see the anxiety on people's faces. They were expecting layoffs. "After weeks of negotiation," Sterling continued, his voice trembling slightly, "I can announce that Innovatech has been acquired. The deal was finalized late yesterday." A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. I saw Veronica's eyes widen, not with fear, but with avarice. A new owner, a new ladder to climb. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she scanned the room, looking for a new face, a man in an expensive suit who might be her new target to impress. "The new owner," Sterling said, his eyes flicking nervously towards the door, towards me, "is very hands-on. He believes in understanding a company from the ground up. In fact, he's spent the last 3 months among us, observing, listening, and getting a true sense of our strengths and our weaknesses." The room went dead silent. Everyone started looking at their colleagues, suspicion and confusion dawning on their faces. Who was it? Which one of them was the secret millionaire? Veronica was scanning the faces of the other department heads, her brow furrowed. She never once glanced outside the room. She never once looked at the cleaner polishing the glass. I stopped wiping, placing the cloth down on my cart. I took off the thick work gloves and pushed open the conference room door. The slight creak made a few heads turn. Veronica shot me a look of pure disgust, as if to say, "How dare you interrupt this?" I ignored her completely. My eyes met Mr. Sterling's. He gave me a tiny, terrified nod. That was my cue. I started walking, not towards the back of the room to empty a bin, but straight towards the head of the table, past the bewildered interns, past the stunned middle managers, past Veronica's chair. Her head whipped around, her mouth opening to hiss something at me. But the words died on her lips as she saw the look on my face. It wasn't the blank, subservient expression of the cleaner. It was a look of absolute ownership. "Mister," Sterling's voice boomed over the speakers, shaking with a mixture of fear and relief. He wanted to see the company for what it truly was, without any pretense, and now he's ready to lead. So without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce you all to your new CEO. Your new CEO, Mr. Alex Thorne. A sound like a collective intake of breath sucked the air from the room. It was followed by a silence so profound I could hear the faint whir of the projector's fan. 150 pairs of eyes bounced between me, standing at the head of the table in my dusty gray jumpsuit, and the ghostly pale face of Robert Sterling. But I wasn't looking at them. My gaze was fixed on one person, Veronica. Her perfectly made-up face had cycled through a full spectrum of emotions in less than 3 seconds. Confusion, incredulous amusement, a flicker of dawning comprehension. And then, finally, the blood drained from her face, leaving behind a stark mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her mouth hung slightly open, her crimson dress suddenly looking garish and loud in the sterile silence. She looked like a predator who had just realized it had been stalking its own zookeeper. I walked the final few steps to the head of the table and placed my hands flat on the cool, dark wood. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice calm and clear, easily carrying through the hushed room. "You may take a seat now." He practically collapsed into the nearest chair, looking immensely relieved to no longer be the center of attention. I turned my attention back to the sea of stunned faces. "Good morning," I said again. "My name is Alex Thorne, and yes, for the last 3 months, most of you have known me as Al, the guy who cleans your offices." I let that sink in, my eyes sweeping across the room, meeting the gazes of people I'd shared brief, anonymous nods with in the early morning hours. I know this is unconventional, but I believe you can't truly know the value of a house until you've checked the foundations. And you, all of you, are the foundation of this company. A few people shifted in their seats. A murmur of understanding, of dawning hope, began to ripple through the junior staff. "I have seen incredible dedication in these halls," I continued. "I've seen people stay late, not for praise, but to get the job done right. I've seen teams collaborate in the break room with more creativity than I've ever witnessed in a boardroom. I've seen the real Innovatech. But I've also seen the rot. I've seen talent stifled by fear. I've seen good ideas dismissed because of who they came from. I've seen people treated not as colleagues, but as obstacles, as less than." My eyes found Veronica again. She was frozen, a statue of terror. "This morning, for instance, I learned a valuable lesson." My voice dropped slightly, drawing everyone in. I learned that spilling a cup of coffee is an act worthy of abject humiliation. I was told that I was an idiot, that I should be grateful to even have a job. I was ordered to get on my hands and knees to clean a floor for someone whose $1,000 shoes were apparently more valuable than another human being's dignity. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts, letting her own words hang in the air like poison gas. The nervous tittering from her sycophants earlier had been replaced by a mortified stillness. They were all staring at her now, seeing her not as a powerful executive, but as a cruel bully who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She finally found her voice, a desperate, strangled whisper. Mr. Thorne, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. If I had known..." "Known what, Veronica?" I cut her off, my voice turning to ice. "That I was a person who deserved basic respect? Or that I was a person who could fire you?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned to the large monitor at the end of the table. "I believe the quarterly reports are due." I gestured to Sterling, who fumbled in his pocket and produced a security fob and a tablet. I took them, connected the tablet to the main screen, and the familiar Innovatech login portal appeared. Veronica watched, her breathing shallow as I entered my credentials. Not the janitor's access code, but the master administrator override. My name flashed on the screen. Alex Thorne, CEO. I smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're right about one thing you said this morning," I said, turning back to her. "You sneered. You're just a cleaner." "Well, I am, and I'm here to clean house." Her facade finally cracked. A tear traced a path through her expensive foundation. I smiled, I said softly, "when you sneered at me, not because it was funny, but because I was opening the account for the company I bought yesterday, and the very first thing I did was run a full audit on the executive expense accounts." The company's main financial dashboard loaded onto the giant screen, a complex web of charts and figures. With a few swift taps, I navigated to the marketing department's ledger. A long list of expenditures filled the screen. There's a lot to admire here. Very creative accounting. I scrolled down the list, every line item I passed causing Veronica to flinch. I stopped at a recent entry, a payment made just 2 weeks ago. I didn't highlight it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it was. I looked up from the tablet, my gaze pinning her to her chair. The entire room held its breath. "Veronica," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Security will be at your desk in 2 minutes. They will escort you to the small, windowless conference room on the 4th floor. You will wait there. You are not to speak to anyone. You are not to touch your computer. You and I, and a team of forensic accountants, have a long day ahead of us. We're going to discuss the $500,000 in consulting fees you've paid over the last year to a firm registered at your brother-in-law's home address." The gasp that went through the room was sharp and collective, a physical reaction to the bomb I had just detonated. Veronica made a small, choking sound like she'd been punched in the gut. The color that had drained from her face was now replaced with a sickly, mottled gray. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted around the room, looking for an ally, an escape route, anything. But she found only the stunned, accusing faces of her colleagues. The little empire of fear she had built had crumbled to dust in a single sentence. 2 uniformed security guards, men I'd shared coffee with in the pre-dawn quiet, appeared at the conference room door as if on cue. They were professionals, their faces impassive, but I caught a flicker of something in their eyes, a grim satisfaction. They had seen her brand of cruelty up close, directed at the support staff, for years. This was justice. "Ms. Vance," one of them said, his voice a polite but firm rumble, "if you'll come with us." She didn't move. She just stared at me, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes. It was a look I'd seen before, in other boardrooms, on other faces. The look of someone whose carefully constructed world had just been obliterated, leaving them stranded in the ruins. But there was no pity in my heart for her. Pity was a luxury she never afforded anyone else. "Go with them, Veronica," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. With a final, shuddering breath, she pushed her chair back. The scrape of its legs against the floor was unnaturally loud in the silent room. She rose with a strange, robotic stiffness, as if her limbs no longer quite belonged to her. Without another word, she walked towards the door, the 2 guards falling into step beside her. The entire room watched her go, a silent funeral procession for a career. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing her fate. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting the reality of what just happened settle over everyone. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a coup, a revolution from the bottom up. Then I turned back to the assembled staff, my expression softening slightly. The fear in the room was still palpable, but now it was laced with something else, a fragile, tentative spark of hope. "Now," I said, my voice resonating with a new energy, "let's talk about the future of Innovatech, a future without that kind of toxicity." I gestured to the empty chair where Veronica had sat. The old way of doing things, management by intimidation, valuing titles over talent, rewarding politics instead of performance, that ends today, effective immediately. I clicked a button on the tablet, and the screen behind me changed from the damning financial ledger to a simple, bold slide that read, "Project Chimera." "For the past 3 months," I explained, starting to pace slowly in front of the table, "I wasn't just emptying your trash cans. I was listening to your ideas, the ones you were too afraid to bring to your managers. I read the proposals you threw away because you were told they were too ambitious. I saw the late-night emails, the weekend projects, the passion you poured into your work when you thought no one was watching. I saw heads start to nod around the room. I was speaking their language, acknowledging their unseen struggles. I found a dozen brilliant, potentially game-changing projects buried in the company's servers, abandoned because they didn't fit into someone's narrow, quarterly profit-driven vision. Project Chimera is about resurrecting them." I clicked again. The screen filled with the names of 6 projects, each one next to the name of the junior developer, designer, or engineer who had originally proposed it. A young woman in the back row, a quiet coder named Priya I'd often seen working through her lunch, gasped when her name appeared next to a revolutionary AI logistics system she'd been told was a pipe dream. "These projects are now our top priority," I declared. "The teams will be led by the people who conceived them, regardless of their current job title. They will report directly to me. They will have the resources, the budget, and the creative freedom they need to succeed. We are no longer a company that says no because we are a company that asks, what if?" The atmosphere in the room was transforming. The fear was melting away, replaced by a rising tide of excitement. People were looking at each other, wide-eyed. It was a new dawn, and it was real. "There will be other changes," I continued, my tone serious again. "A complete overhaul of HR policies, a new transparent salary structure, and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of behavior we all just witnessed. From this moment on, respect is not optional. It is the currency of this company." I spent the next hour laying out my vision, answering questions, and for the first time, truly introducing myself. I wasn't just some mysterious billionaire who'd bought them out. I was someone who had walked their halls, cleaned their desks, and understood their frustrations on a visceral level. I could see the trust building in their eyes. When the meeting finally adjourned, the mood was electric. People filed out not with dread, but with purpose. For the first time in a long time, the halls of Innovatech buzzed with genuine optimism. I remained at the head of the table, watching them go. My work was just beginning. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, with the terrified executive team, with the relieved HR department, with the shell-shocked lawyers. We began the painstaking process of untangling Veronica's web of deceit, and I started putting my own leadership team in place, promoting talent from within. By late evening, the office was quiet again. I stood in my new office, Sterling's old office, which I would soon be converting into a collaborative workspace, and looked out over the city lights. It had been a long, brutal day, but it was a good day. My personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from an unsaved number. I frowned, opening it. The message was short, cryptic, and sent a sliver of ice through my veins. "You think you've won. You got rid of the queen, but you haven't met the king. He knows who you are, and he knows what you did to his sister." The city lights blurred into a meaningless smear of neon and gold. The elation of the day, the hard-won victory, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. His sister. Veronica wasn't just some random corporate tyrant. Of course, she wasn't. People with that much arrogance, that much untouchable confidence, they always have a safety net, and hers was apparently a king. I reread the message, my thumb hovering over the number. It was untraceable, of course. A burner phone. This wasn't some hot-headed threat made in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated move, a warning shot fired across my bow. He wanted me to know that he was watching, that Veronica was just a pawn, and I had just stumbled into a much larger and much deadlier game. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even realized existed. Veronica's rapid promotions, her seemingly limitless budget, the way even the former CEO, Sterling, seemed to walk on eggshells around her. It wasn't just her own ferocity. She had backing, powerful backing. And now I had kicked the hornet's nest. "He knows what you did to his sister." The words echoed in my head. I hadn't just fired her. I had publicly humiliated her, exposed her as a fraud and a thief, and handed her over to a team of forensic accountants who would likely ensure she faced criminal charges. In the world these people inhabited, that was an unforgivable sin. Not the crime itself, but the public disgrace. I sank into the plush leather of the CEO's chair, a chair that suddenly felt less like a throne and more like a target. For years, I had moved through the corporate world like a ghost, buying failing companies, restructuring them, turning them profitable, and moving on. My methods were unorthodox, my identity a closely guarded secret. I was the myth of the undercover billionaire, a story people told but never really believed. It was my greatest advantage, allowing me to see the raw, unvarnished truth of a company. But now, my cover was blown. The king knew who I was. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford that night. Instead, I dove into research, leveraging every resource I had. My personal security team, a small elite group of former intelligence analysts, started digging. The name Vance was common enough, but connected to Innovatech and high-level corporate power, the field narrowed. By 3 a.m., they had a hit. Her full name was Veronica Vance Ashford, and her brother was Damien Ashford. The name hit me like a physical blow. Damien Ashford wasn't just a king, he was an emperor. The head of Ashford Global, a ruthless, sprawling conglomerate with its fingers in everything from private military contracts to media empires to cutting-edge tech. He was a shark who swam in the deepest, darkest waters of international business. He was infamous for hostile takeovers that left entire industries gutted, and for a personal ruthlessness that made Veronica look like a schoolyard bully. He was also notoriously private, a phantom who pulled strings from behind a curtain of lawyers and shell corporations. And I had just publicly crucified his baby sister. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Innovatech wasn't a major player. It was a boutique tech firm, a pet project. For Ashford, its $94 million price tag was pocket change. He'd likely bought it for Veronica to play with, a corporate sandbox to keep her occupied, and I had just kicked over her sandcastle. The next morning, the office was still buzzing with the energy from the day before. People smiled at me in the hallways, greeting Mr. Thorne with a respect and warmth that was entirely new. They saw me as their savior. They had no idea I might have just signed their company's death warrant. I spent the day putting out fires and laying the groundwork for my new vision, all while a storm gathered on the horizon. I met with the newly promoted team leads, including a visibly glowing Priya, and we mapped out the first steps for Project Chimera. For a few hours, I almost managed to forget the text message. I let myself believe that this was the start of something good, something I could build instead of just fix. The illusion was shattered late in the afternoon. My new assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Clara, whom I'd promoted from the mailroom, buzzed my intercom. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice tight with a nervousness I hadn't heard before. "There's a Mr. Graves here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's on behalf of Damien Ashford." The name dropped into the office like a stone. "Send him in, Clara," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold dread that was creeping up my spine. The man who entered was the polar opposite of what I expected. He wasn't a hulking bodyguard or a slick lawyer in a $1,000 suit. He was of average height, with thinning gray hair, spectacles, and a slightly rumpled tweed jacket. He looked more like a history professor than a corporate hatchet man. But his eyes were ancient and cold, devoid of any warmth or emotion. They were the eyes of a man who had seen and done things that would break ordinary people. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a soft, cultured purr. "My name is Arthur Graves. I handle certain delicate matters for Mr. Ashford." "I can imagine," I replied, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. He sat, placing a worn leather briefcase on his lap but not opening it. "Mr. Ashford is a man who values family loyalty above all else," Graves began, getting straight to the point. "He understands that his sister can be spirited. Her methods, at times, lack a certain finesse. However, the public nature of yesterday's events has caused him significant displeasure. Your spirited sister was embezzling $500,000 from my company," I shot back, my voice hard. Graves didn't flinch. "A rounding error in the grand scheme of things, an internal matter that could have been handled with discretion. Instead, you chose theater. You made an example of her. Mr. Ashford does not approve of his family being used as props. And I don't approve of my employees being treated like dirt," I retorted. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Graves's lips. A man of principle. How refreshing. Mr. Ashford appreciates a worthy opponent, but he also believes in consequences. He leaned forward slightly, his cold eyes locking onto mine. He has instructed me to deliver a message. You have disrupted his ecosystem. You have caused him embarrassment. This will not stand. Is that a threat, Mr. Graves? It is a statement of fact, Mr. Thorne. A forecast. A storm is coming. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. But Mr. Ashford is also a reasonable man. He is willing to offer you a simple, elegant solution. A way out. He finally opened his briefcase. Inside there was a single folder. He slid it across the polished desk towards me. I didn't touch it. "What is this?" I asked, my jaw tight. "That," Graves said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a check. A cashier's check for $150 million. Double what you paid for this little company. It's yours. All you have to do is sign the company back over to an Ashford-held entity, reinstate Veronica Vance with a public apology for the misunderstanding, and walk away. Disappear, just as you always do, and you will never hear from us again." He leaned back, his work done. The offer hung in the air, a gilded poison. It was my escape route, a chance to take a massive profit and avoid a war with a man I wasn't sure I could beat. All I had to do was betray every single person in this building. I had to throw Priya and her dreams under the bus, return the staff to their prison of fear, and let the rot win. All I had to do was sacrifice everything I had just promised them. I looked from the folder to the cold, waiting eyes of Arthur Graves. Then my gaze drifted past him, through the glass walls of my office to the bustling floor beyond. I saw Priya animatedly explaining something on a whiteboard to her new team. I saw two junior marketers who used to cower when Veronica walked by, laughing together by the coffee machine. I saw the spark, the hope, the future I had promised them, a future that Damien Ashford wanted me to snuff out for a fat check. My decision was made. I met Graves's gaze, a cold fire igniting in my own. I slowly reached out, my fingers closing not around the folder containing the check, but around the intercom button on my desk. I pressed it. "Clara," I said, my voice ringing with cold, hard clarity. "Could you please send security up to my office? Mr. Graves is trespassing." Arthur Graves didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. The faint, cold smile simply returned to his lips, as if my defiance was not just expected but welcomed. "A man of principle to the very end," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Mr. Ashford will be disappointed. He so prefers a tidy resolution." "There's nothing tidy about blackmail," I said, leaning back in my chair, my hand still resting near the intercom button. "Tell your boss Innovatech is not for sale. Not now, not ever." "As you wish," Graves said smoothly. He stood up, adjusting his rumpled tweed jacket. The two security guards appeared at my office door, their expressions grim. They looked from me to Graves, sensing the dangerous current in the room. Graves gave them a dismissive glance. "There's no need for that, gentlemen. I'm leaving." He turned back to me, his gaze sweeping over my office, the optimistic buzz of the employees visible through the glass walls. "Enjoy your little kingdom, Mr. Thorne. Empires built on hope are so very fragile and so very flammable." He left the folder with the 9-figure check sitting on my desk, a monument to the deal I'd just refused. Then he turned and walked out, his steps silent, disappearing down the hall like a phantom. The moment he was gone, the war began. It wasn't a war of armies, but of algorithms, lawsuits, and whispers. Ashford Global came at us from every conceivable angle. Our top suppliers suddenly canceled their contracts, citing unforeseen logistical issues. A wave of frivolous lawsuits, all filed by shell corporations, bogged our legal team down in mountains of paperwork. Vicious, anonymous smear campaigns began appearing online, targeting me personally, painting me as a corporate raider who had stolen the company through deceit. Key employees, particularly those in senior R&D roles, began receiving unbelievable job offers from Ashford-owned competitors, offers designed to gut us of our best talent. The hope that had filled these halls began to curdle into fear. The stock price, which had rallied after my takeover, began to plummet. I saw the doubt creeping back into people's eyes. They had believed in me, and now I had led them into a hurricane. I refused to let them see my own anxiety. I called another all-hands meeting. This time I didn't hide in a janitor's uniform. I stood before them as their CEO and laid it all out. I told them about Damien Ashford, about his offer, and about why I had refused it. He offered me a way out, I told the silent, anxious crowd. A way to take a massive profit and leave all of you to face the fallout. I turned it down, because this company is not just a line on my balance sheet. It's you. It's your ideas, your hard work, and your future. He thinks he can break us with fear and money. He's wrong. He underestimated Veronica, and now he is underestimating us. Then I turned the tables. I told them about Project Chimera and the other initiatives. He wants to poach our talent? Fine. For every person who leaves, we will promote 2 from within. We will invest in our own people. He wants to tie us up in court? Our legal team will fight, and in the meantime, our R&D teams will innovate so fast that by the time any lawsuit is settled, the technology they're fighting over will already be obsolete. He thinks he can break our spirit? We will show him what a company united by respect and a common purpose can achieve. It was a gamble. I was asking them to choose the hard road, to walk into the storm with me based on nothing more than my word. I held my breath. And then, someone started clapping. It was Priya. She stood up, her eyes shining with fierce determination. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire room was filled with a thunderous, defiant applause. It wasn't the sound of naive optimism anymore. It was the sound of a battle cry. That day, the fight truly began. We became a guerrilla company, nimble, creative, and utterly relentless. When Ashford's media outlet smeared us, our marketing team launched a viral Innovatech underdog campaign, turning his attacks into a badge of honor. When our suppliers vanished, our engineers and Priya's logistics team worked around the clock, building new supply chains from scratch, often with smaller, more innovative partners who were eager to challenge the Ashford monopoly. We lost some people, yes. But for every person who took Ashford's money, 3 more dug their heels in, working with a passion and loyalty that money could never buy. The turning point came from the last place I expected, Veronica. After months of legal proceedings facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, she finally broke. But instead of just taking a plea deal, her lawyer contacted mine. She was willing to testify. Not just about her own embezzlement, but about the much larger, much dirtier financial operations of her brother's empire. She had been his pawn for years, and he had abandoned her the second she was no longer useful. Her spiritedness, as Graves had called it, had finally curdled into a vengeful fury. Her testimony, given under oath, was a nuclear bomb. It detailed years of racketeering, market manipulation, and corporate espionage, all orchestrated by Damien Ashford. It was the key that federal investigators needed to unlock the gates of his empire. The day the news of the federal indictments broke, the war ended. Ashford Global's stock went into freefall. Damien's assets were frozen. The phantom who had ruled from the shadows was suddenly dragged into the harsh, unflattering light of justice. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room. It was packed again, but this time, the mood was purely celebratory. Our stock was at an all-time high. Project Chimera had just launched its first product to rave reviews, and Priya was now our Chief Innovation Officer. We hadn't just survived the storm, we had learned to sail in it. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. They were no longer cowed or afraid. They were innovators, leaders, partners. We had faced down an emperor and won. After the meeting, I was walking back to my office when I passed the spot where Veronica had spilled her coffee all those months ago. The tile was pristine, gleaming under the lights. I stopped for a moment, remembering the sneer, the humiliation, the cold fury that had started it all. "You're just a cleaner," she had said. I smiled, a real smile this time, full of warmth and satisfaction. She was right. I was a cleaner. I had arrived to clean up a toxic culture, to sweep out the rot, and to polish the hidden gems until they shone. And looking at the vibrant, thriving company around me, I could honestly say the place had never looked better. My job was done.